What happens when Hollywood's most beloved humanitarian comes face to face with royalty gone rogue on daytime television? In just 31 seconds, a single comment would expose the real person behind the carefully crafted public image, leading to the most shocking ejection in talk show history. The View studio buzzed with an electric tension that Thursday morning. Whoopi Goldberg shuffled her cards nervously as the cameras rolled, knowing today's guest lineup was pure television gold. Sitting across from each other at the iconic table were two of the most talked about women in the world. Angelina Jolie, the Academy Award-winning actress turned United Nations Special Envoy, and Meghan Markle, the Duchess of Sussex, who had traded royal duties for Hollywood dreams. "Welcome back to The View," Whoopi began, her voice carrying that familiar warmth that had made her America's favorite moderator. "We're here with two incredible women who have used their platforms to make real change in the world. Angelina, you've just returned from your latest humanitarian mission. Tell us what you saw." Angelina leaned forward slightly, her hands clasped together on the table. There was something quietly powerful about her presence, the kind of authenticity that came from years of walking into war zones and refugee camps with nothing but genuine compassion. "Whoopi, what I witnessed in South Sudan was heartbreaking, but also inspiring. Mothers walking hundreds of miles with their children, seeking nothing more than safety and a chance at life. These aren't statistics. These are human beings with dreams, hopes, fears, just like all of us." The studio fell silent as Angelina spoke, her words carrying the weight of real experience. Joy Behar nodded thoughtfully from her seat, clearly moved by the sincerity in Angelina's voice. "That's beautiful," Meghan interjected suddenly, her perfectly practiced smile never wavering. "It's so important to use our platforms responsibly. I mean, when Harry and I stepped back from our royal duties, it was exactly for reasons like this. We wanted to be able to speak our truth and really connect with people on a human level, you know?" Sunny Hostin raised an eyebrow slightly. The conversation had been about refugees in South Sudan, not about Meghan's decision to leave the royal family. But before anyone could redirect, Meghan continued, "I've actually been working with several organizations myself," Meghan said, adjusting her posture to face the cameras more directly. "The work I'm doing with women's empowerment, it's really groundbreaking. We're changing lives every single day." Angelina remained composed, but those who knew her well might have noticed the slight tightening around her eyes. She had spent decades quietly doing the work, never seeking credit, never making it about herself. "That's wonderful, Meghan. Which organizations are you working with specifically?" "I'm always looking to collaborate with people who share the same commitment to actually being on the ground, doing the work." Meghan's smile flickered for just a moment. "Well, there are several. I prefer to keep some of my charitable work private, you know? I don't believe in doing good for the cameras." "Of course," Angelina replied gently, "though I find that transparency in charitable work actually helps build trust with donors and communities. When people see exactly where their money goes and how it's being used, they're more likely to contribute. That's why all my foundation's work is completely transparent. Every dollar is accounted for." The atmosphere in the studio began to shift. What had started as a friendly conversation between two philanthropists was beginning to feel like something else entirely. Meghan's media training kicked into high gear. "That's a wonderful approach for you," Meghan said, her voice taking on a slightly sharper edge that she tried to mask with another smile. "But I think there's something to be said for doing good work without needing public validation for it. Some of us are motivated by pure compassion, not by publicity." A collective intake of breath could be heard from the studio audience. Even Whoopi looked taken aback by the barely veiled accusation that Angelina Jolie, who had spent nearly 2 decades working with refugees, was somehow motivated by publicity rather than genuine care. Angelina remained perfectly calm, her voice steady and measured. "I appreciate that perspective, Meghan. I think what matters most is that vulnerable people are being helped, regardless of whether the cameras are rolling or not. I've found that when you're truly committed to a cause, you're willing to use every tool available, including media attention, to shine light on forgotten crises and marginalized communities." "Exactly my point," Meghan said, seemingly missing the gracious way Angelina had just corrected her. "It's about authentic commitment. When you've lived through real adversity, when you've faced real discrimination and hatred, it changes how you approach helping others. It makes your compassion more genuine." The studio fell eerily quiet. Meghan had just suggested that her own experiences of adversity somehow made her compassion more genuine than that of a woman who had spent years in refugee camps, holding dying children in her arms, fighting for the forgotten and displaced around the world. Sarah Haynes shifted uncomfortably in her seat. This wasn't going the direction anyone had expected. Angelina, however, remained unruffled. "I think all experiences of hardship can deepen our empathy," Angelina said carefully, "whether it's facing personal challenges or witnessing the suffering of others. What I've learned is that true compassion isn't about comparing our pain to others' pain. It's about recognizing our shared humanity and acting on it." "That's very philosophical," Meghan replied with a laugh that didn't quite reach her eyes. "But when you've actually lived as a woman of color in an institution that wasn't built for people like me, when you face racism and had your mental health suffer because of it, it gives you a different lens. It makes your advocacy more authentic." The words hung in the air like a challenge. Meghan had just dismissed Angelina's decades of humanitarian work as merely philosophical, while positioning herself as the more authentic advocate. The audience began to murmur among themselves. Angelina took a slow breath, her composure still intact. "I have tremendous respect for anyone who faces discrimination and finds the strength to speak out about it. That kind of courage is admirable. I also believe that suffering shouldn't be a competition. The refugees I work with, they're not thinking about whose pain is more valid. They're just hoping someone, anyone, will see their humanity and help." "Of course," Meghan said quickly, perhaps realizing she had pushed too far. "I'm not minimizing anyone's work. I'm just saying that lived experience matters. When you're speaking for marginalized communities, it helps to actually be from those communities." The implication was clear, and this time, even Whoopi couldn't let it slide. "Now wait just a minute," Whoopi interjected, her voice carrying the authority that had made her a television legend. "Are you suggesting that Angelina can't authentically advocate for refugees because she wasn't born in a refugee camp?" Meghan's perfectly composed facade began to crack as she realized the corner she had painted herself into. The studio lights seemed hotter suddenly, and beads of perspiration appeared on her forehead despite her makeup artist's best efforts. "That's not what I meant at all," Meghan said, her voice rising slightly as she tried to backtrack. "I have nothing but respect for Angelina's work. I'm simply pointing out that representation matters. When marginalized people see someone who looks like them, who has walked in their shoes, speaking up for them, it resonates differently." Angelina nodded thoughtfully, still maintaining her gracious demeanor even as the attack on her credibility continued. "You're absolutely right that representation is crucial. That's exactly why I work so closely with local leaders and community members in every country I visit. I never speak for them. I amplify their voices. I use my platform to make sure their stories are heard, not to tell my own story." The distinction was subtle but powerful, and it wasn't lost on the audience or the other hosts. Angelina was making it clear that her approach was about lifting others up, not positioning herself as the hero of their narratives. "That's beautiful in theory," Meghan replied, her smile now completely artificial. "But at the end of the day, you're still a wealthy white woman flying in and out of these communities. You get to leave. They don't. There's a certain privilege in being able to choose when to engage with suffering." A gasp rippled through the studio audience. Meghan had just accused one of the world's most respected humanitarian advocates of engaging in what activists call poverty tourism. The accusation was not just wrong, it was cruel, especially coming from someone who had never spent a single night in a refugee camp or held a malnourished child in her arms. Sunny Hostin looked visibly uncomfortable, her journalistic instincts telling her this had crossed a line from healthy debate into something much uglier. Joy Behar was shaking her head in disbelief. Angelina's response was measured and dignified, but for the first time, there was steel in her voice. "Meghan, I understand that you may not be familiar with the depth of my commitment to this work, but I've spent the last 18 years of my life dedicated to refugee advocacy. I've adopted children from communities affected by conflict. I've funded schools, medical clinics, and legal aid programs. I don't fly in and out. This work is my life. And that's admirable." Meghan shot back, her voice getting louder as her desperation grew. "But let's be honest about what that island? You adopted children from other countries as a wealthy celebrity. That's not the same as a woman of color raising her own children while facing real discrimination and real threats to her safety." The studio erupted in uncomfortable murmurs. Meghan had just suggested that Angelina's adoption of children from Cambodia, Ethiopia, and Vietnam was somehow less legitimate than biological parenthood and had done so while making it about her own experiences yet again. Whoopi had heard enough. Hold on," she said, her voice cutting through the tension. "We need to pump the brakes here. Are you seriously questioning the legitimacy of adoptive families right now?" But Meghan was spiraling, her media training completely abandoned as her true feelings poured out. "I'm not questioning anything. I'm just saying that some of us have had to fight for everything we have. Some of us didn't get handed a platform because of our last name or our Hollywood connections. Some of us had to earn our right to speak. The accusation was breathtaking in its audacity. Meghan Markle, who had married into the British royal family and used that connection to launch her current media career, was suggesting that Angelina Jolie, who had been working in humanitarian causes since before Meghan was even acting, had somehow been handed her platform. Angelina's composure finally showed signs of strain, though she remained dignified. "I'm not sure what you're implying about how I earned my platform, but I can tell you that everything I've achieved in my humanitarian work came through years of learning, listening, and proving myself to communities that had every right to be skeptical of me." "I'm sure it did," Meghan said with a condescending tone that made several audience members audibly groan. "But let's be real. When you walk into a room, people listen to you because you're Angelina Jolie, the movie star. When I walk into a room, I have to prove myself twice as hard because of what I look like and where I come from." Sarah Haynes finally found her voice. "But Meghan, with respect, you also walk into rooms as the Duchess of Sussex. That's not exactly starting from nothing." Meghan whipped around to face Sarah, her mask now completely off. "Oh, so now my title matters? When it's convenient for your narrative? Because last time I checked, that same institution that gave me that title also tried to destroy me. They questioned my child's skin color before he was even born. They refused to protect me from racist attacks. They denied me mental health support when I was contemplating suicide." The studio fell into stunned silence. Meghan had just weaponized her most serious allegations, using claims of racism and mental health struggles as a club to bludgeon anyone who dared question her authority on any topic. Angelina, who had remained silent during this outburst, finally spoke. Her voice was quiet but firm. "Meghan, I can't speak to your experiences within the royal family. Those are your experiences. And if that's what happened, I'm truly sorry you went through that. But using your pain to diminish other people's work or to claim a monopoly on authentic advocacy isn't healing for you or helpful for the communities we're all trying to serve." It was a masterclass in grace under fire. Angelina had acknowledged Meghan's claims without validating them, expressed compassion without accepting the premise that past hurt justified present behavior, and redirected the conversation back to the people who actually mattered, the vulnerable communities they were supposedly there to discuss. But Meghan wasn't done. Her voice cracked with emotion that seemed equal parts genuine hurt and calculated manipulation. "Easy words from someone who's never had to question whether the world sees them as human. You've never had to wonder if your children will be safe because of the color of their skin. You've never had your mental health dismissed because it wasn't convenient for an institution's image." The audience was growing restless. What had started as discomfort was turning into something approaching hostility toward Meghan's increasingly desperate performance. Even those who might have been sympathetic to her earlier claims were beginning to see through the manipulation. Whoopi tried one more time to salvage the segment. "Ladies, I think we all want the same thing here. We want to help people who are suffering. Can we find some common ground in that shared goal?" But Meghan was beyond reason now, her voice rising to near shouting levels. "Common ground? How can there be common ground when some people get praised for doing the bare minimum, while others get attacked no matter how hard they try? When some people get celebrated for their charity work, while others get questioned and criticized and have their motives analyzed?" Angelina had maintained her dignity throughout the entire attack, but this final accusation seemed to strike something deep. For just a moment, her perfect composure wavered, and the studio cameras caught a flash of genuine hurt in her eyes. The flash of hurt in Angelina's eyes lasted only a second before it was replaced by something else entirely. Not anger, but a quiet strength that came from years of facing down warlords, corrupt officials, and skeptics who had questioned her every move in some of the most dangerous places on earth. "Meghan," Angelina said, her voice so calm it was almost a whisper, yet it carried clearly through the now silent studio. "I've spent nearly 2 decades working in places where people are dying every single day. I've held mothers as they buried children killed by bombs. I've sat with teenage girls sold into slavery. I've walked through camps where families have been displaced for years with no end in sight. Not once in all that time have I ever made any of their stories about me." The words hung in the air like a verdict. The studio audience was completely still, sensing they were witnessing something extraordinary. Meghan's face flushed red as she realized the gravity of what Angelina had just said. But instead of backing down, she doubled down with a desperation that was painful to watch. "That's exactly my point," Meghan exclaimed, her voice cracking with hysteria. "You get to be the saint. You get to be the perfect humanitarian. Nobody questions your motives because you fit the image of what people expect a savior to look like. Meanwhile, women like me get torn apart in the media for existing. Whoopi stood up from her chair, something she rarely did unless she was about to end a segment permanently. Meghan, you need to stop right there. But Meghan was beyond listening to anyone, including the host whose show she was on. No, I'm tired of being polite. I'm tired of watching privileged white women get credit for caring, while women of color get demonized for speaking their truth. The accusation that Angelina Jolie was just another privileged white woman getting unearned credit was so far from reality that even the studio crew began shaking their heads. This was a woman who had literally bled for the causes she supported, who had been shot at, threatened, and attacked for her advocacy work. Angelina stood up slowly, her movements deliberate and controlled. When she spoke, her voice carried an authority that seemed to fill the entire studio. I think this conversation has run its course, Angelina said simply. Whoopi, thank you for having me. I hope everyone watching will remember that there are millions of people around the world who need our help and they don't care about our personal drama. They just need us to show up. She turned to walk away from the table, but Meghan's voice stopped her. That's right, walk away, Meghan shouted, her voice echoing through the studio. Just like everyone else, just abandon the conversation when it gets uncomfortable. When someone challenges your perfect image, Angelina turned back slowly. And for the first time in the entire segment, she looked directly into Meghan's eyes. What she said next was delivered with such quiet power that it seemed to come from somewhere deeper than mere words. Meghan, I have been challenged by people far more dangerous than you in places far more threatening than this studio. I have been questioned by generals, presidents, and dictators. I have justified my presence in their countries while bombs fell around us. None of them ever questioned my commitment to the people I serve. But you want to know the difference between those challenges and this one? The studio was so quiet that the camera operators seemed afraid to breathe. Those people questioned my methods, my politics, my approach. They never questioned whether the refugees were worth helping. You've spent the last 20 minutes making this entire conversation about you, about your pain, your struggles, your authenticity. You haven't mentioned a single person who needs help, not one. The words landed like physical blows. Meghan's mouth opened and closed, but no sound came out. For the first time since the segment began, she had been rendered completely speechless. But Angelina wasn't finished. I came here today to talk about families torn apart by war, children who haven't had a meal in days, women who walk miles just to find clean water. Instead, I've spent my time listening to you weaponize suffering to attack people who are trying to help. That's not advocacy, Meghan. That's exploitation. The studio audience began to murmur in agreement. Several people started clapping, slowly at first, then building into sustained applause. Meghan's face went through a series of emotions, confusion, anger, desperation, and finally, pure rage. She shot up from her chair so violently that it rolled backward and nearly toppled over. "How dare you!" she screamed, her voice so loud that several audience members jumped. "How dare you lecture me about exploitation? You have no idea what I've been through. You have no idea what it's like to have the whole world against you." Whoopi moved quickly toward Meghan, her producer instincts kicking in as she realized the situation was spiraling completely out of control. "Meghan, you need to calm down right now," Whoopi said firmly. But Meghan was beyond calm. She was pointing at Angelina with a shaking finger, her voice becoming more unhinged with every word. "She sits there acting all perfect and composed, but she's just another Hollywood fake. At least I'm honest about my feelings. At least I don't pretend to be something I'm not." The security guards near the edges of the studio began moving closer, recognizing the signs of someone who was about to completely lose control. Angelina remained perfectly still, watching Meghan's meltdown with what could only be described as professional interest, like a documentary filmmaker observing human behavior. "You want to talk about helping people?" Meghan continued screaming. "Where were you when I was being destroyed by the British press? Where was your advocacy then? Where was your platform when I needed someone to speak up?" The question revealed everything. In Meghan's mind, Angelina's failure to publicly defend her during her royal family conflicts was somehow equivalent to abandoning refugees in war zones. The narcissism was breathtaking. Angelina's response was delivered in the same calm tone she might use to address the United Nations General Assembly. "Meghan, I don't involve myself in other people's family disputes. I work with people who don't have families anymore because theirs were killed by war." That was the moment Meghan completely snapped. "I don't have to listen to this," she shrieked, grabbing her purse and phone from the table. "I don't have to sit here and be attacked by someone who thinks she's better than me." Whoopi stepped directly into Meghan's path as she tried to storm off the set. "Meghan, if you leave now, in the middle of the show, you're never coming back to The View. Do you understand that?" Meghan stopped in her tracks, her chest heaving with rage and exertion. For a moment, it looked like she might come to her senses and sit back down. Instead, she looked directly into the camera and delivered what would become the most infamous line in daytime television history. "The View can go straight to hell, and so can all of you." With that, she pushed past Whoopi, knocked over a coffee cup that shattered on the floor, and stormed toward the exit. But she wasn't done yet. As she reached the edge of the set, she turned back one final time and screamed at the top of her lungs, "And you, Angelina, you're nothing but a fraud, a privileged fraud who uses other people's misery to make yourself feel important." Security guards flanked her on either side as she was escorted out, but her voice could still be heard echoing through the hallways as the cameras continued to roll. Angelina remained at the table, completely composed, as if nothing unusual had happened at all. She looked directly into the camera and spoke with the quiet authority of someone who had seen real darkness in the world. "To anyone watching who works with refugees, displaced families, or any vulnerable communities, please don't let this discourage you. The work is more important than any of us. Thank you." Whoopi sat back down heavily, shaking her head in disbelief as the credits began to roll over. The sound of Meghan's voice still echoing from somewhere backstage, still screaming about authenticity and fraud and how the world had treated her unfairly. The most shocking ejection in talk show history was complete, but the real story wasn't about who got kicked off. It was about who remained, composed, and dignified, focused on the people who truly needed a voice in a world that had just witnessed what happens when activism becomes about the activist instead of the cause.